Right, welcome to this special edition of Contact Center Showcase, Lessons from the Lockdown. And today my guest is Evan Jones, who is the chairman of BPeSA, the national body for contact centers, BPO, and global business services. Evan, could you just give us a background to BPeSA in the pre-COVID-19 environment, the vision, the mission, the purpose of BPeSA, and we'll then come on to the realities of now?
Sure. BPeSA over the last 2 years has really been focused, I would say, BPeSA National over the last 2 years has really been focused on two things, and I think quite successfully so. The first is really thinking about how we mobilize the industry nationally and across all regions. And that means a few things. That means getting very strong regional coordination across the different parts of South Africa. That means mobilizing more membership and giving value to those members, and really ensuring that BPeSA is self-sustainable in what it's trying to achieve over the next couple of years. The second thing it's been really focused on is building partnerships and building coalitions with government, with source markets, with special purpose vehicles across the economy, and other social and government partners. The success of that strategy has really paid off when you look at the results. BPeSA has grown new jobs in South Africa. Over the last year, we've grown at 28% compounded growth. Its membership base has gone up over 300%. It has formalized partnerships with national government and the presidency. It has formalized contracted partnerships with the Department of Trade and Industry. It has formalized partnerships with its social partner, Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, and it also has very formalized partnerships at provincial level, at local government levels in the various provinces, but more importantly, also strong partnerships in source markets such as Australia, North America, United Kingdom, and others. The results speak for themselves. So pre-COVID, we had strong growth trajectory of new jobs. As I mentioned, 28%. Just over the last 14, 15 months, we've generated around 12,000 new jobs into South Africa. And this is way above the targets that BPeSA set for itself.
Come in here and ask just a question, which I think a lot of people have posed in the past, is BPeSA initially, going way back, tended to be focused on foreign inward investment, international job creation, etc. And yet I'm seeing a lot more national, internal captive development as well. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So BPeSA has two primary mandates. It is to stimulate demand and demand for the economy, foreign direct investment demand or net new job demand, whether that's local or international business. And the second primary mandate is around skills development and ensuring that we're building a talent pipeline both for the domestic market, but also to meet the growth of the foreign investment market. Its mandate has absolutely been one of both domestic and international. And increasingly, as we've seen our membership base grow, a large percentage of that membership base is in actual fact domestic businesses, large banks, large telcos that operate here in South Africa. And what's necessary for the full ecosystem of domestic and international to thrive is around skills, is around critical skills visas, it's around a range of things. Ecosystem intermediation between what BPO, Global Business Services, is for South Africa requires the same institutional muscles, both for domestic as it does for international. And we've seen that paying off certainly now in COVID, because our efforts are not only to preserve the international base of operators, clients that we're servicing here in South Africa, but is to inform and support our domestic operators at the same time. And the work, which we'll talk on in a moment, has really served that purpose really well. And in fact, it's built our community of global business operators and domestic businesses over the last 2 weeks.
Excellent. Now, along comes COVID-19. And if we look back late February, early March, when I think COVID looming.
before we go to COVID-19, I just want to talk a little bit more, just in extending my answer to your first question about BPeSA, because it's really important context to how we're responding in COVID.
Okay, it makes sense.
We certainly over the last 12 months have also been very focused on elevating the profile of the sector in the national government's agenda, the strategic profile of the sector in the national government's agenda. And we're talking about profiling ourselves up against the likes of agriculture, automotive, and those sorts of very large contributing sectors to the South African economy. In doing so, there is a special purpose vehicle here in South Africa that focuses on the priority sectors. That special purpose vehicle, which is essentially an intermediary for the economy, for business, is called Public-Private Growth Initiative, the PPGI. Now, the PPGI, the reason I want to talk about it is because it is an absolutely essential instrument for how all of South African business is responding to COVID at the moment. And it's the vehicle that we've used to safeguard and protect as much as we can the industry over the last 2 weeks. That special purpose vehicle, Public-Private Growth Initiative vehicle, has a leadership team on top of it, but it interfaces directly with the presidency, it interfaces directly with the Department of Health, it interfaces directly into the Department of Trade and Industry, and it represents on many levels the voice of sectors. The reason it's such an important point to make is because we've been working with the special purpose vehicle for the better part of a year, long before COVID. And we have worked through the special purpose vehicle to elevate the profile of the sector, and we are one of the priority sectors in South Africa. And if it wasn't for that work over the last 12 months, we certainly would have had a much, much tougher time in responding to COVID. It's because of our relationships into public-private growth initiatives.
I see. So the PPGI relationship was embedded long before COVID came along, and
absolutely
has enabled and to leverage that relationship.
And the sector was given priority status in that vehicle. So already we were talking with the presidency. Already we were getting more support from government because of that priority status. In addition to that, I want to say, we as BPeSA, as the industry association, also worked very hard in elevating the sector into a priority status within the presidency. And the president has talked about in his 2 States of the Nation addresses a number of national strategic programs. And in 2 State of the Nation addresses, he's spoken about global business services as a priority sector. That was not by chance, that was by design. And we have actively been engaging in the president's national initiatives in addition to the PPGI vehicle. And because of that, it's given us real reliable channels and real reliable sponsorship for the sector in these trying times. It's not to say that the last 2 weeks hasn't come without its challenges, come with huge challenges for our sector. But if it weren't for those channels, I suspect, and I think I'm quite confident that we would have been hit a lot harder than what we have.
Makes sense. So, all right, so I jumped the gun a bit there. So middle of March, along comes COVID. And this is where BPeSA kicked in, and now I'm understanding from you, started leveraging those relationships within government. Could you pick it up from there?
Sure. So, I mean, I think I want to say that the lockdown came as a surprise to the whole country. And putting in the lockdown in place required government and business across the whole country to act within a matter of 72 hours, 3-4 days. They had to get permit processes in place. They had to think about law enforcement agencies for the whole country. It's not exclusive to our sector. So with that context in mind, when the president declared a state of disaster, which was on a Sunday 2 weeks ago, he called the priority sectors from the leadership from the priority sectors of the PPGI to his residence in Pretoria with the Minister of the Department of Trade and Industry to basically say, this lockdown is approaching us. We have very little time. How are you individually as sectors going to think about preservation of your sectors and managing your sectors in the wake of COVID-19? And I was fortunate enough to attend that meeting alongside 10 or 12 other business leaders from automotive, from health, from gas. And we had a 3-hour engagement with the Minister of DTI and the President himself and his advisory team. For 3 hours, we debated the different sectors and the preservation strategies. And so I think the first point I want to make is, as a sector, we couldn't be more fortunate to be sitting around the table in that setting alongside the government and the President, and alongside leaders of other sectors, and representing the economic purpose vehicle, which is PPGI, because that vehicle is now driving how the country thinks about how it responds. So that's important context. 48 hours later, that leadership group, including our sector, had to work on proposals and draft proposals for government to consider around what would be deemed as essential services for South Africa. We collectively and as an industry association put in global business services as an essential service under quite specific definitions. We went through iterations of those essential services publications over almost 48 hours before it was gazetted. We were optimistic at that stage. We were optimistic that our sector was covered, but we were thrown a curveball, and that some of the original definitions that we had put into the essential services list were in fact omitted and not in the Gazette. It was subject to interpretation, though, because when we engaged with the DTI, we had the Department of Trade and Industry's full support that, based on how the Gazette was written, in fact, we had sufficient cover as a sector. So it was a bit of a gray area rather than excluded. And so we had things like telecommunication services that we could register ourselves for under essential services. But it wasn't enough for us as a sector. There was a broad consensus from our operators and our members that it wasn't clear enough, and we needed more clarity from our government partners. We needed more clarity from the government to tell us, to be explicit in the Gazette about contact centers, specifically international contact centers, so that our operators can operate with a clear conscience and within the regulatory framework.
But if I can put this into context, these further refinements of the regulations came after lockdown. So some of the operators were keeping going and operating, and so along came now the second wave of changes to those regulations. Am I correct?
Yeah, and what I keep saying to our board and to some of the members that we're engaging with, the ambiguity in the first round of regulations hit every business in every sector. It was ambiguous for ports, it was ambiguous for agriculture, it was ambiguous for small shops operating, whether they could without a license. And therefore we were feeling that ambiguity as much as every sector was. Having said that, there have now been 4 republications of that Gazette, and our sector is probably one of the only, if not the only, that has featured prominently in all 4. And so every new Gazette that has come out, we've used our channels in Public-Private Growth Initiative, we've used our channels in the Department of Trade and Industry, and our relationships in the presidency and national programs to get revisions of the essential services list for our sector. So as we sit here today, we have coverage for international global business services, essential services. We have coverage for specific domestic contact centers in retail, insurances, and others. We have specificity and definitions around ICT. There's a range of things. And whilst it is not 100% perfect, when I take a look back and if I take a step back and I look at all the other sectors, I think I could make a strong argument that we are probably one of the only sectors that has that degree of specificity and cushioning that we have. And that's because we have been very organized, we've had strong motivation, we've been able to present facts and data, and we've been able to make a very compelling argument to different power centers in government, by the way. So one needs to keep in mind in a lockdown, it's not only having the negotiation with the Department of Trade and Industry. The Department of Trade and Industry, which represents our economy, has to have the same negotiation for every sector with the Departments of Health, who are managing the safety of our people. And it's this dynamic which is not uncommon to other parts of the world. But it's this dynamic that our sectors really had to talk to. Can we provide safe workplaces, and can we adhere to the workplace guidelines for the people working in these contact centers? How are we provisioning transport? How is our sector thinking about working from home? Can 70% of our operators put their people from home working solutions and 30% in buildings? But it's this level, because BPeSA is so well organized now and responsive and agile, that we've been able to rapidly respond to government, unlike other sectors, I believe. And we've been able to put forward data-driven motivations that have stood us well and have had us reflected in all 4 gazettes that have been published subsequent to the lockdown.
Now, pre-lockdown, the estimates are that the industry, the BPO, contact center, industry as a whole, was employing around about 250, 260,000 people. What, in your opinion and rough estimate at this point in time, do you think BPeSA has been instrumental in retaining and protecting what percentage of the jobs out there?
It's a very difficult question to answer, and I certainly don't want to be too presumptuous in putting a number out there, because we are actually busy with that impact analysis as we speak. And the reason I'm a little bit sheepish to just answer with a number, I think just to share with the listeners that, you know, as I've spoken about the Gazette at a very high level, but the more difficult issue that we've been dealing with is inconsistency of law enforcement officials actually exercising that Gazette. And so, you know, we've had certain regions where the law enforcement officials have interpreted the Gazette accurately, and operators have run very, very smoothly with no issues. And we've had other parts of the country where that Gazette has been misinterpreted, and we've had horrific incidences, you know, executives that have faced very, very unpleasant law enforcement incidences, shutdowns for that matter, and unlawfully so. And those have had repercussions in some offshore contracts moving their work. But also, I will say that because of the progress we've made, we've actually seen some inflow of business, interestingly enough, where lockdowns have been even more heavily enforced, such as the Philippines. So I think it's going to come through the wash a little bit. But there's, I mean, our estimates, when I look at just real numbers, and when we look at the numbers we presented to the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Health, the real numbers are that we estimate that for essential offshore services, so if we're doing tourism repatriation for a different country, or if we're doing broadband support for a different country, or insurance financial services for a different country, those are classified as offshore essential services. What we're not operating is offshore sales, offshore debt collection, you know, cross-sell, upsell, those sorts of things are not operational at the moment. And so when we look at real-term numbers, the essential services that fall within the category that I've just shared with you equate to about 20,000 people. And we have committed to operating our workplaces at 1/3 of the occupancy for health reasons. And so one can assume that we've got somewhere in the region of between, you know, 7,000 and 9,000 people in physical workplaces, and a big contingency working from home. So you spoke about the figure of 250,000 plus jobs. A large percentage of those are domestic, and we know that a large percentage of those continue to operate under the essential services definitions in the Gazette, and even more so since yesterday's Gazette of the updates, which provides for retail insurance. So those will start to come back online. So, you know, we still have to figure out the numbers, Rod, but I think we've certainly created a cushion. We do forecast that with the very turbulent waters that we've gone through in the last 2 weeks, because of the inconsistency of law enforcement officials, the ambiguity in the regulations, we did see some job losses, and we will see some job losses. Some small, medium enterprises can't cash flow their businesses in the way that they have. Some of their offshore contracts have had to scale themselves back, resulting in a scale back on our side and retrenchments. So our estimates are that we will see certainly job losses and industry contracting by anything between 20 and 30% as well, which is devastating. We have been able to provide a cushion, and we will continue to provide as many cushions as we can in keeping the sector alive.
Just before we go into the view of the future, the resources of BPeSA right now, the team that you've got behind it, engaging with government, engaging with members. I'm also led to believe that the BPeSA's support infrastructure is in fact available to anybody in the sector, whether they are members or not. Is that correct?
Without a doubt. So we took, the moment the lockdown was announced, we took an open source approach to our support. We created regional WhatsApp groups, which we invited non-members to, and any of this kind of supply chain participants, not only operators. We took a conscious decision to say any helpful material that we were either curating or receiving from government or PPGI or other sources that we would share. We've hosted webinars, we've hosted calls. It's been an open community to really invite people in. And certainly our approach has been one of collaboration and inclusion as far and wide as is necessary. We've had to move really, really quickly over the last 2 weeks, as you can well imagine. And I think in times of such uncertainty, where none of us have led through before, it just requires lots of collaboration, lots of contact with many, lots of consultation, and also at times lots of independent decision-making as BPeSA, because we don't have the time to meet broader consultation objectives, but to meet the government's stringent timelines. And so, for example, the third round gazette included BPeSA as a bit of a monitoring and evaluation intermediary in South Africa, because we had to give a second level of security to the Departments of Health and to the DTI that in opening up international essential services and keeping domestic essential services running within our mandate, that we would perform a secondary measure of monitoring and evaluation for health reasons and for good health reasons, for not only for our sector but for the whole country. So, you know, those sorts of decisions were also made independently rather than more broadly.
Okay, heading for the wrap now, but just a view of the future, the post-lockdown. I'm sure lockdown's not going to be lifted overnight. It's going to be a gradual reintroduction of activities back into the economy. What is BPeSA's view of the next 12 to 18 months of driving recovery, driving perhaps FDI and job creation going forward? Just very briefly, just so we've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, this post-COVID question, and I'm learning from all the sectors, is a very crystal ball answer. And because of the real-time nature of what we're dealing with in the country, we know that the government is intending to look at a phased opening up of the economy, as is most governments around the world. What that will look like, the timing of which we don't know. With that uncertainty, we have to just be very responsive in what we're dealing with now, and continue to work in the way that we are working now. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is, in crisis, there is also opportunity. And certainly we have to think about our sector in two ways. I think what is it that we have to preserve? Excuse me, absolutely preserve, which is what we've been very focused on, a preservation strategy at the moment. But thinking about where is it that we have to pivot as part of our recovery strategy. So we are, as a board and as an executive, thinking through our sector's recovery strategy, which is both one of preservation, but also of pivoting. And certainly if we can think through those in a very systematic way and strategic way, there are growth opportunities through COVID. We've already received some praise from offshore markets. We are seeing, I've certainly in the last 2 weeks seen some new contracts come in on the back of the Gazette. And so it's to be determined based on the status of our country and how well our government is able to contain the virus, whether we will thrive in those conditions or whether we'll be hit by another wave. I don't know. But in terms of the pivot, I mean, I think globally, the sector is changed forever. I think home working has accelerated. I think workplace protocols and safety will be a permanency in our future. And we need to take these factors into account and think about our country's proposition and how BPeSA supports that. And there certainly are other opportunities to profile our sector in new and bold ways into government, because we, as a sector, we've had a conversation about what we've kind of done historically. We've had a conversation how we're responding in COVID, but also as a sector, we're helping this country out tremendously at the moment. We're deploying helplines for the Department of Health. We're deploying helplines for our Department of Employment and Labor. We're deploying support into the DTR. So we're acting as incredibly helpful enablers at the same time. And as we think about reprofiling the sector in context of the country's recovery, because I do think that sectors like tourism are just, it's going to take so long to recover from what we're experiencing, and hospitality and manufacturing, that between global business services and some of the ICT sectors, I think they represent the green shoots of accelerated recovery for the country. And I think we need to be bold enough to step into that space.
Well, yeah, that's encouraging, and that's a very positive note to end on. So I think, I'm quite sure out there the greater industry or sector is immensely grateful to BPeSA for what it's not only doing now, but as you quite rightly pointed out, for establishing the foundations on which you are now able to assist the sector and make sure of a blueprint for the future moving forward. So on behalf of, I think, the industry, Evan, and your board and your backup teams, thank you so much, and thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Rod. And I think from my side, just a very humble and warm thanks to all the leadership in BPeSA, all of the members. It has been a community effort, and it's just been humbling to see how the industry has come together. It's been humbling to see how the BPeSA team have worked relentlessly day and night over the last 2 weeks, and will continue to work relentlessly. And so whoever's watching this, I can't thank you enough, and we'll keep pushing on. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.